what I would like to talk to you guys about is the danger of ideas. And you yeah, I'm not necessarily talking about trying to be in a conservative society where people are suppressing information, but it's more like the ideas are dangerous to you personally and not to society. And the reason they're dangerous to you personally is that, well, first of all, I'm curious how many of you already have an idea for a startup that you'd like to do? I can't really take a show of hands, can I?
I think
Not really.
so.
We can we'll just guess it's 50%.
Okay. Um, well, so that's a bit of a problem. As we know, the statistics for startups are quite poor, and essentially, what, about 90% of them die. So since you're likely to be a large enough sample for statistics to apply, that means that you are likely to be um, more than likely your startup will die. Now, why is it going to die? Probably because you chose the wrong thing to do, rather than you're just not good at it. And so what I would like to help you do today is figure out what's wrong with your idea so that you can change it to something that's actually good. Now, one of the things that people do a lot is to get an idea in their head of something they think is really cool to build. There's a lot of people who start companies started from the perspective of thinking about technology, and that's definitely been my path. I like to think about cool gadgets and technologies and devices and mechanisms and machines and so on. And so they come up with this idea for something really cool to build, and then they go off and show it to the world in the form of starting a company around it and then see if it's actually marketable. And usually it's not. A smarter way to start a company is to look around and see what people need and see what there's actually a market for, what they're actually willing to pay for, and then build that for them. But it takes a different mindset, and it's a little bit more of a kind of, I don't know, person-connected, business-oriented mindset. So I would like to tell you a story about how I did it the wrong way, and then sort of give you some hints and tips about how I think you should go about doing it the correct way. All right. So in 2000, which is now ancient history, I decided that I wanted to change computer history, and I had already noticed this transition from the desktop to the laptop that was happening, and decided what I want to do is create the next level of that and make a more portable PC. Of course, this is pre-iPhone and all of that, right? And so I set out to do it. I co-founded with a friend of mine in San Francisco, and we got a funding round in 2001, and we kept developing our product. We got another funding round in 2004, and then we finally launched our product and started making some significant revenue. We got up to over $25 million in revenue, and we were feeling pretty proud of ourselves. And we had, the world's smallest PC, and we got a ton of press, and we created a new category, and we had all these big partners, and we continued doing pretty well. We got, Bill Gates holding up our product and telling the world it's the best thing around that runs Windows, and we were being promoted by senior vice presidents at Intel, and all these firsts, and all the magazines were saying great things about us, giving us top ratings, winners of awards, best of CES, et cetera, et cetera. And then we're on all kinds of television shows, but since I mostly like to build things and read good books, I don't know any of those television shows, but a lot of my friends informed me that my product was now famous. And we were also doing great in terms of tech specs versus giant companies, and we were only about 110 people. and fantastic partners, Dell, SAP, Intel, Motorola, etc., wireless carriers. So everything is going great for us, except we had a couple problems which you should definitely avoid, especially if you're considering being the CEO of your new company. And that is that in 2006, our CEO unexpectedly died in the middle of the night of a heart attack. And he was 50 going on 25, and a world champion bicycle racer, and so it's kind of a mystery and very unexpected. But that did slow things down a bit for us. And we really needed someone. He was a great, great leader and visionary, and we really needed someone to be steering our ship in the direction toward our market rather than continuing to add all the cool features we could think of, which would be, so I'm a technical co-founder, so that's how I think. So unfortunately, we didn't have that leadership, and we were kind of started going adrift and missing our market. And then we produced the next best, incredible, smallest computer ever. I think this has pretty much only been surpassed now by the Samsung Galaxy Note, which has approximately all of its specs, and is the same size and approximately the same display, and finally a pocketable, shipping, functional computer with an OLED display, etc. 5 years later. So hurrah for Samsung. So we were just about to ship this. It was pretty much all ready after years of work. And we even won an award before we shipped it, which is kind of hilarious. But then the end of 2008 happened, and the credit crisis killed our ability to run cash through our company, and we had to lay everybody off. And we got another burst of press that wasn't as exciting, which was that we were dead. So the worst thing about it for me was that so I'm overlaying this blue graph on the screen. I don't know if you can see with that resolution, but the blue graph is the number of employees, and it was rather sad that we had to lay them all off. I mean, in 2004 we had kind of a correction where we did soul searching and decided that some people weren't quite right for the company, and we had to let a bunch of them go. I understand that's really difficult to do in Europe. It probably varies from country to country. But anyway, in the United States, you do what you have to do to survive. So anyway, that was really sad to have to tell all of our employees that sorry, you have to go and find new ways to support your families. So I guess the point is that you should keep in mind that your product has to be sold into a market. And our product was, it was the smallest PC in the world. We got in the Guinness Book of World Records. It was a technical triumph, but it wasn't really designed for a market. We got the PowerBook design team from Apple right when we founded. They did a great job of replicating their DNA, basically, which is to make the really small, sexy, kind of expensive consumer hardware. And we were a small company that couldn't afford to do massive volumes to get really low prices. So we had high prices. And it turned out that the general consumer market didn't care about having a really high-priced small computer. They want low prices. And the people who could afford to pay for a high-priced small computer were military and industrial vertical applications. And they didn't want something sexy and svelte, and they wanted something that you could spill water on and drop and take into dusty factories and so on, which ours couldn't handle. So if we'd figured that out, then it would be a very different world for us today. So that's so I just kind of want you to think about markets a little bit. So I'm going to talk to you about markets briefly. One of the most effective ways, I think, of talking about markets is through more thinking on crossing the chasm. You've probably all seen or heard of this concept of that there's early adopters in a given market, and the place where startups typically die is trying to transition from early adopters to the early majority. And the early majority are people who actually want to see something work practically, and the early adopters don't really care. They just, if they see a new technology, they're going to try it because maybe it'll work for them, maybe it won't, but they love technology. And the early majority is like, well, technology is just a tool, and if they see good examples of it working, they'll adopt it. But it's a hard chasm to get across, and most startups die down there in that crack between there. And that's one of the most important things for an early company to pay attention to. I'll get back to that a little bit more in a second. I think people pretty much get this now. I gave this talk a while ago, and I think it was more important to drive home this message, which is essentially test your ideas with as few resources as possible to see if they're viable. And if there's a problem with your idea, figure out what it is and then try it again. That's about as much as you need to know about that. Yeah, right. Measure it, learn, try again. Just briefly, I want to mention that Chris Anderson's book, his book Before Last, has a really cool appendix in it with a lot of interesting business models for having free elements in your company. In the appendix, there's like 14 of them, and they could be worth taking a look at just to inspire you to do something other than just your vanilla freemium model. Getting out there and getting the world to see your product obviously is typically, especially for web startups, better than trying to make money early, and most people know this by now. And almost always what happens is that you die by obscurity, not very many people hear about you. And this is another concept of adverse network effect that I should talk about, but we probably don't have time for this. So my philosophy for entrepreneurship, which I love, is to fail early, find out what's wrong with your idea, but never give up. And those are not contradictory. Importantly, don't be lame. I guess that's sort of American slang for being kind of not very good at what you're doing. And if you want to seek out advisors, whether they're formal advisors or informal advisors, the latter, either one, then it's really important that you be excellent when you're talking to them, and especially they're essentially practice for investors, and when you talk to investors, you should know more than they do about your market and the competitive landscape and which other companies have tried to do what you're going to do and why they failed if they did or succeeded if they did and how you're different, etc. And try to anticipate the questions you're going to get and have excellent answers for them, and don't avoid questions, etc. I just get a lot of people asking me some question about their business. It's like, sure, okay, I have a moment. What do you? And then they ask me some question that's like, dude, you should know that answer. Why are you asking me? Just go look it up. Like, let me Google this for you. So don't be that person. So what things should you do if you want to use people to help you? First of all, use yourself. Try to figure out how to kill your idea. One thing that I encourage people to do is to pretend that you're a friend of yours and that you're asking them for money for your business. And you're a pretty good friend. And you say, hey, do you have 10,000 euros to invest in my company? And if you think you'd invest, that's a good sign. But it can be a sobering sobering recognition for yourself. Also, ask your friends what they think of your business, but don't ask them in a way. Well, the best is to, if they don't even know, like, okay, here's the very best. Ask them which company idea they like best and present 3 of them to them. And it's sort of like, you know, if you take your girlfriend home to mom, say, hey, mom, what do you think of Angelina? And she says, oh, she's a very nice girl. But if you took 3 girlfriends home and said, mom, which one of these girls should I marry? She would be a lot more discerning, and she'd probably give you a more honest answer. So if you ask your friends, you know, which of these 3 company ideas do you like, and use some discipline and don't try to make the one that you're secretly in love with more exciting sounding than the other ones, you might be surprised which ones grab their attention. And don't be afraid to kill your idea, because you know the fact that you're involved in entrepreneurship at all means that you're a creative and intelligent person, and just because you have an idea, and maybe it's the first idea you ever had for a company, don't worry about it. There are lots of them. There are 100 times more ideas than there are people to execute them. So don't be attached to your first idea. Like, don't fall in love with it and just be like, it's the best idea ever. We're going to stay in love forever. Nothing bad's ever going to happen. Make sure you pick the right one. Another good method to use is to try out your idea on VCs that you don't like. So, like, get a list of venture capitalists. You know, in the U.S. we use the funded. I'm not sure how well that functions in Europe, but and then kind of go down the list to some cruddy ones that people are like, they're okay, but I wouldn't really want to work with them that much, or just kind of third tier, and find a connection, go on LinkedIn or whatever, get introduced to them, and just go out and just try your pitch on them. And you will, if you haven't pitched to them before, you will likely do a terrible job, which is okay. And I mean, your mileage may vary, right? I don't know each of you individually, so some of you are probably superstar marketing people and know how to present things. And hey, look at that, there's a deer walking by my back window. So go pitch to them, and you'll get a bunch of feedback. First of all, you know, it's like taking a standardized test or something. If you take like O-levels or A-levels or whatever, the first time you take it, a lot of what you're learning is just the test-taking process itself, and not necessarily the content. Like, the difference in your score between taking a practice test and taking the actual test, you get a huge bump just from taking the practice test. So you'll also kind of get an idea of what sort of questions people are going to ask you, and that kind of thing. So you're trying to getting through this. Yeah, competitors are interesting. Just because there's a competitor in the market doesn't mean you shouldn't enter. You know, use what they're already learning to your advantage. Grab their employees. You can find out what they're doing on LinkedIn. And you know, probably the most important thing is to connect with your customers. Like, don't think that customer service is something that you should save money on early on. You should spend half of your money on customer service early on, and it should have a high degree of information flow back to you about what people think of your product. You know, have your CEO do customer support for an hour a day, and not say I'm the CEO. Just get on the phone with your customers and figure out what's going on, because therein lies your success or failure. A/B testing is normal these days. There's lots of software to do it. You can also try a couple of different markets, and one of them may just take off, and the other one just for mysterious reasons. Like, nobody understands this stuff. It's not really a science yet, so it's a bit of a black art. And if one of them takes off and the other doesn't, then just go with it. Go with the one that works. Mostly talk to people. Again, your most likely outcome is death by obscurity. Most people are already busy doing other stuff they're doing. Especially in Europe, there's hardly any companies being started. It's really hard to do there, so most people just are living their workaday lives. So talk to people. The only people not to talk to probably are companies that are specifically oriented towards doing the same kind of thing you're doing, or ones that might be interested in acquiring you. Wait until you're reasonably mature to talk to them. So hopefully a lot of you have heard of the Gartner Hype Cycle. I think it's a really effective way of thinking about new startup technologies and products. And generally it's that when some new idea first comes out, people get all excited about it, more excited than they should. And so you get this kind of underdamped feedback response. And so first you get this big peak, and then after a while people are like, wait a minute, what was so exciting about the internet again? One of the things that I tried applying that to was the internet itself, and you'll notice a reasonable correlation where it kind of ramping up in 2000, having this big excitement. Oh, it's going to solve all of our problems, and poverty and war are going to go away, and then people are like, oh, I think we overinvested, and there's this big crash. And now we do realize, yes, the internet is actually useful. Another thing I noticed that I wrote a blog entry on a while back was that there's a beautiful correlation between the Gartner Hype Cycle and the technology adoption cycle from Moore, and that this sort of cross section of society also maps nicely onto a chronological life cycle of an idea. Just looking, an example from one a few years ago. You can see it. I don't know if you can read the fine print, but some of the technologies that were in the early stages are probably, you can probably recognize now, are kind of starting to head over the top of the peak and heading down, and some of them that were heading down before are probably now reaching maturity as actual useful technologies. Terahertz waves that was on the way up a few years ago, I think is on the way down now. I've noticed some airports taking out those scanners, which is kind of interesting. Anyway, they'll probably put them back in later. Yeah, one thing they don't talk about in the Gartner Hype Cycle is that that highway has a lot of exits on it. For instance, that's right about, not all the companies make it all the way through. Some of the technologies die at any given point along the cycle, and that's essentially where my last company bid it. So just some tips. More features doesn't necessarily mean that your product is going to be better received. There are plenty of examples of people going into markets that were previously full of feature-rich products that when they provided something really simple, consumers loved it. And Google kind of tends to use that philosophy, and they're doing pretty well. Another way of looking at, I try to figure out what product to build, is called conjoint analysis, and that consists of recognizing that consumers are very, very bad at predicting what price they're willing to pay for something. So if you ask, and as you should, people about your product and your company and that kind of thing, if you ask them, how do you think this is priced, or would you pay for this, usually you'll get a wrong answer. The only way I know of to really test pricing is actually already be shipping your product and change your pricing around, which could look bad if you go in strange directions, and you can piss people off. But you can also sort of masquerade, this is something that's morally acceptable to you. Try selling your product under a different name. Maybe use some Google AdWords to draw a little bit of traffic, and then don't really build your product. And then have a credit card payment page for signing up for the product, and see how many people actually get to the credit card payment page versus the number of people who land there. Of course, the credit card payment page will bomb out with a 404 partway through the process, But the only way to really tell whether somebody's going to pay for something is if they're actually in the process of paying for it. Otherwise, they're just pretending. People don't even know if they're going to buy something when they're going to the store until they actually buy it and they're coming home with the thing. And, you know, purchasing behavior is pretty mysterious. So conjoint analysis is a way where you're saying, given a fixed price, let's say you ask 100 people, you're going to spend $1,000 on a device. Which features would you like to have? You can have a larger display, but then you'll have to have you know, a lower a lower battery life, or you can have longer battery life, but then you'll have a thicker device, and so on. And when making those kinds of trade-offs, people tend to be a lot more accurate. So adverse network effect is one of the things that comes up when, especially when people try to do network type things that involve multiple interactions, especially location-based startups. They're very, very hard to do. So you've probably heard of the network effect. That is, if you have one fax machine, it's useless. 2 fax machines, you're getting somewhere. 3 fax machines, now you have 3 times as many interactions. 4 fax machines, now you have 6, et cetera. And it grows as the essentially there's the square of the number of nodes. So that's a hugely beneficial effect. And the adverse network effect for startups, as I like to put it, is that when you're small and your product relies on the network effect, you'll never get there. You need some sort of unfair advantage or some kind of trick to get you to the point of actually having enough users to solve your problem. If you try to build like a location-based dating app, this is the holy grail, right? You want to make an app, you want to go into a bar or something and say, who's here that wants to meet me tonight? And you download the app and you go to the bar and you're the first one, and there's nobody there and you're all alone. And you're like, screw this app, it's stupid, I'm never going to use it again. And that's everybody's first experience, and you never succeed. So you need some sort of way of bridging. One way is with scale. Like if you're Google, it's easy to roll out location-based stuff because you already have 100 million users or 500 million users or whatever it is in that area. But another way is to give them like have a Trojan horse, like to give them something so compelling that is like a primary offering. The secondary offering, which is location-based, can eventually take off. And I think Waze succeeded at that, and that they had a really nice map system. I don't know how many of you saw that startup, but they had a really nice mapping system for traffic, and it showed the traffic in nice ways. And that in itself was good enough that people just kind of used it instead of the normal Google Maps app. But they also allowed people to provide additional information themselves, like I see an accident at this intersection, or there's a police giving tickets here or something. And eventually they got enough of a network that Google bought them. And so that's a happy outcome for an entrepreneur. So just wrapping up here, my 3 rules for internet startups. Can anybody guess them? Correct. It's distribution, distribution, and distribution. Basically, if I'm investing in your company, which I don't do that often, unless you're a biotech startup, then I don't want to be the one paying to test your idea by buying a bunch of advertising. I want to test your idea. Like the investor perspective is, how do I test this idea to see if it's going to fly or not? Because most of them don't. And you want to test it using the absolute minimum amount of money. And the amount that I want to pay to test an idea is the absolute minimum it takes just to code it up and throw it on the air and see if people want it. And I don't want to pay for $1 million worth of ads that are supposedly necessary to get the world all excited about the idea, because if you have to pay to get people excited about the idea, it's probably a stupid idea. Therefore, you should have some method of getting distribution for your idea that doesn't involve a lot of money. The best is if it's so-called viral. But you should be really clear about what it takes to do that. Like every person who hears about it needs to tell more than one other additional person, et cetera. And you have to have mechanisms built in for that, or have other distribution methods. You realize that your product is so compelling to a partner that already has a distribution channel that they'll take you in, that you're having to pay, et cetera. That's the number one failure mode I see when I'm watching pitches or presiding over pitching competitions, is that people haven't thought through a free way of distributing their startup. So I thank you for your attention and wish you luck being the small fry in a world of large companies. And a few of you will make it, and you know, my hat's off to you. So if you have any questions, if I've been unclear, let me know. Thanks.